The plasma cannon fire had stopped 3 hours ago, but Crix could still smell the burnt metal and flesh that covered the battlefield. His 4 legs trembled as he limped between the scattered bodies of his former squad mates. The Valkyrian warhound's enhanced hearing picked up every small sound. The distant hum of retreating ships, the occasional groan of dying machinery, and his own labored breathing. Blood dripped from a deep gash across his shoulder where enemy shrapnel had torn through his armored hide. His left rear leg dragged uselessly behind him, the bone clearly broken. But physical pain meant nothing compared to the crushing weight in his chest. They had left him behind. His own people, the ones he had served faithfully for 8 cycles, had abandoned him when the retreat order came. Crix remembered the exact moment when everything changed. Commander Szeth had looked directly at him as the enemy forces closed in. The Valkyrian officer's cold yellow eyes had shown no emotion as he calculated the cost of carrying a wounded warhound back to the ships. In that split second, Crix had seen his own death sentence. Szeth had turned away without a word, signaling the remaining troops to fall back. No one had even glanced back as they left him bleeding in the mud. The warhound's enhanced senses, bred specifically for combat, now worked against him. He could smell the approach of scavenger drones in the distance, their metal bodies cutting through the air with mechanical precision. Soon they would arrive to strip the battlefield of anything valuable, including wounded enemies left behind. Crix knew he should find somewhere to hide, but his body refused to move any further. As darkness fell across the alien landscape, strange sounds echoed from the far side of the battlefield. Crix's ears twitched as he heard something unexpected, voices speaking in a language he had never encountered before. The sounds were softer than Valkyrian speech, with musical tones that rose and fell in patterns that almost seemed pleasant. His combat training immediately identified them as the enemy, but something about their approach felt different. 3 figures emerged from behind a crashed Valkyrian fighter craft. They moved carefully, methodically checking each fallen soldier. Crix's enhanced vision allowed him to see them clearly despite the dim light. They stood on 2 legs, like most species, but their bodies seemed smaller and more fragile than any warrior race he knew. Their skin appeared pale and soft, without natural armor or obvious weapons. Most strange of all, they wore expressions of what looked like concern as they examined the battlefield casualties. One of the humans, for that was what they called themselves, knelt beside a wounded Valkyrian soldier. Instead of finishing off the enemy, the human began applying some kind of medical treatment to the soldier's injuries. Crix watched in confusion as the human worked to save the life of someone who had been trying to kill humans just hours earlier. The lead human, a female with short dark hair, spotted Crix lying among the debris. She pointed in his direction and said something to her companions. They began moving toward him, and Crix felt his combat instincts surge to life. Even wounded and abandoned, he was still a warhound. His lips pulled back to reveal teeth designed for tearing through armor plating. But as the humans approached, they showed no fear. The female raised her hands in what appeared to be a peaceful gesture. She spoke in those same musical tones, though Crix could not understand the words. Her voice carried none of the harsh commands he was used to hearing from Valkyrian officers. Instead, there was something gentle in the way she spoke, as if she were trying to calm him rather than assert dominance. The female human knelt down just outside of Crix's striking range. Up close, he could see that her eyes were a strange blue color, unlike anything in nature on his homeworld. Those eyes looked at him with what he could only describe as kindness, an emotion he had rarely seen directed toward a warhound, even from his own people. She reached slowly into a pack at her side and pulled out what appeared to be medical supplies. When she held up a small device that Crix recognized as a universal translator, his ears perked forward despite himself. The device would allow them to communicate, though he was not sure what he could possibly say to these strange enemies who seemed intent on helping rather than harming him. The translator activated with a soft chime, and the human's next words came through clearly in Velcarian. "Easy there, big guy. We're not going to hurt you. My name is Sarah Chen, and these are my teammates Marcus and David. We're medics with the Human Colonial Defense Force." She gestured to the two males behind her, who were watching the surrounding area for threats while keeping their weapons lowered. Crix tried to speak, but could only manage a low growl. His throat felt dry and raw from breathing the smoky battlefield air. Sarah seemed to understand his difficulty and offered him a container of water. The warhound's instincts screamed warnings about accepting anything from an enemy, but his thirst overrode his caution. The water was clean and cool, better than anything he had tasted in weeks of military rations. "You're hurt pretty badly," Sarah continued, her voice steady and professional. "That leg needs immediate attention, and you've lost a lot of blood from that shoulder wound. Will you let us help you?" The question shocked Crix more than any weapon could have. No one had ever asked permission to treat his injuries before. Velcarian military medics simply did what needed to be done, often without even using pain suppressants on warhounds. The idea that these enemies would request his consent seemed impossible. "Why?" Crix finally managed to croak out through the translator. "I am your enemy. My kind has killed many of your people in this war." Sarah's expression softened even further. "Because you're hurt and alone, and no living being deserves to suffer like this. The war isn't your fault any more than it's ours. We're just soldiers following orders, but that doesn't mean we have to lose our humanity in the process." Marcus, one of the other humans, spoke up from where he was keeping watch. "Sarah, those scavenger drones are getting closer. If we're going to help him, we need to move soon." Crix's ears flattened against his head as he heard the approaching mechanical sounds. The scavenger drones would tear him apart for spare parts and biological samples. Even if these humans intended to betray him later, they offered his only chance of surviving the night. "Will you trust us?" Sarah asked again, extending her hand toward him. Against every instinct bred into him over generations of warfare, Crix slowly nodded his massive head. Sarah smiled, another expression he was not accustomed to seeing, and immediately began working on his injuries. Her touch was gentle but efficient as she cleaned his wounds and applied what appeared to be advanced healing compounds. The pain began to fade almost immediately, replaced by a strange tingling sensation as the human medicine worked to repair his damaged tissue. David, the third human, had pulled out some kind of portable scanner and was running it over Crix's broken leg. The device made soft beeping sounds as it mapped the extent of the injury. "Compound fracture, but clean," David reported. "I can set it properly with the portable stabilizer, but he'll need surgery when we get back to base." "Base?" Crix looked up at Sarah with confusion. "You intend to take me to your military installation?" Sarah nodded while she worked on his shoulder wound. "Our field hospital is about 20 kilometers from here. We have facilities to treat all kinds of wounded, including non-human species. You'll be safe there while you recover." The concept of safety seemed foreign to Crix after a lifetime of warfare. Warhounds were not kept safe. They were used until they broke and then replaced. The idea that these enemies would expend resources to heal him properly seemed too good to be true. As if reading his thoughts, Marcus came over and knelt beside Sarah. "Look, I know this probably seems crazy from your perspective, but humans have a thing about helping wounded animals. It's just how we're wired. Doesn't matter if you're technically our enemy. Right now, you're just a hurt creature who needs medical attention." The word animal should have been insulting, but somehow the way Marcus said it carried no disrespect. If anything, there was a protective quality to his tone that Crix had never heard directed toward his species before. Sarah finished applying a temporary cast to his broken leg using some kind of hardening foam that molded perfectly to his limb. There, that should hold you until we can get proper surgical equipment. Can you walk on 3 legs if we support you? Crix struggled to his feet with help from all 3 humans. His legs still hurt, but the intense agony had faded to a manageable ache. More importantly, the bleeding from his shoulder had completely stopped. Whatever medical technology these humans possessed, it was remarkably effective. The scavenger drones were now visible on the horizon, their red scanning beams sweeping across the battlefield as they approached. Sarah helped Crix move toward a small transport vehicle that had been hidden behind a pile of rubble. It was unlike any military vehicle he had ever seen. Instead of heavy armor and weapon mounts, it appeared designed entirely for medical transport. Almost there, Sarah encouraged as they helped him climb into the vehicle's medical bay. Just rest now. We'll take good care of you. As the transport lifted off and carried them away from the battlefield, Crix found himself staring back at the carnage where his former comrades had abandoned him to die. For the first time in his life, he was in the care of beings who seemed to value his survival more than his usefulness as a weapon. The thought terrified and comforted him in equal measure. Through the transport's window, he could see the lights of the human base growing larger in the distance. Whatever lay ahead, it had to be better than bleeding to death alone on an alien battlefield. And perhaps, if these strange humans proved trustworthy, he might finally understand what it meant to be more than just a disposable tool of war. The human medical facility was unlike anything Crix had ever experienced. Instead of the cold metal and harsh lighting of Velcarian military installations, the walls here were painted in soft colors that seemed designed to promote healing rather than intimidate. The air smelled clean, without the constant metallic tang of weapons and machinery that permeated every Velcarian base he had known. Dr. Elizabeth Hayes, the chief medical officer, had personally overseen Crix's surgery to repair his broken leg. She was an older human with silver hair and the steady hands of someone who had spent decades saving lives. During the 3-hour operation, she had talked to him constantly, explaining each procedure and asking about his comfort levels. No Velcarian medic had ever bothered to explain anything to a warhound, let alone ask how he felt. Now, 5 days later, Crix lay on a specially designed bed in the recovery ward. His leg was encased in some kind of biofoam cast that promoted accelerated bone growth. The shoulder wound had healed completely, leaving only a faint line in his dark fur. But the most remarkable change was not physical. It was the way the humans treated him. Every few hours, different medical staff would check on his progress. They would greet him by name, ask how he was feeling, and actually listen to his answers. A young technician named Jennifer had even brought him what she called comfort items, a soft blanket and a toy that squeaked when he bit it. The concept of comfort for its own sake was completely foreign to him. "How's our patient today?" Dr. Hayes asked as she entered his room, tablet in hand. She had taken to visiting him personally each morning, something that amazed him given her obvious seniority. "I am functioning within acceptable parameters," Crix replied automatically, using the standard response he had been trained to give Velcarian officers. Dr. Hayes sat down in the chair beside his bed, her expression gentle but concerned. "Crix, you don't have to talk like a machine here. I'm asking how you feel, not requesting a status report." The distinction confused him. "I do not understand the difference. Is my medical condition not what you require to know? Your medical condition is important, yes, but you're not just a collection of injuries to be fixed. You're a living being with thoughts and feelings." She leaned forward slightly. "For instance, are you comfortable? Are you bored? Do you miss anything from before? Are you worried about what will happen next?" Crix stared at her for a long moment. No one had ever asked him such questions. Warhounds were expected to endure discomfort without complaint, find purpose only in their missions, and never concern themselves with the future beyond the next battle. The idea that his emotional state mattered to someone seemed impossible. "I am confused," he admitted finally. "Your species continues to act in ways I cannot predict or understand." Dr. Hayes smiled. "That's perfectly normal. Culture shock is common when different species interact for the first time in peaceful circumstances. Would you like to tell me about your life before the battle where Sarah found you?" The invitation to speak about himself was so unexpected that Crix found himself talking before he could think better of it. He told her about his birth on Velcaris Prime, where warhounds were bred in military facilities and separated from their mothers after only a few weeks. He described the brutal training regimens that prepared them for combat, where weakness resulted in immediate termination. He explained how warhounds were assigned to units based on their abilities and expected to serve until death or disability made them useless. "We are not considered individuals," he said, surprised by how bitter his own voice sounded. "We have designations, not names. I chose Crix myself after hearing it in a captured human transmission. My original designation was Combat Unit 77 Alpha 9. Dr. Hayes looked genuinely horrified. "You gave yourself a name because no one else ever had?" "Names are for beings who matter beyond their function. Warhounds are tools. Tools do not require individual identification." "That's absolutely wrong," Dr. Hayes said firmly. "Every thinking being deserves a name, deserves to be treated as an individual. The fact that you chose your own name shows remarkable spirit and self-awareness." The conversation was interrupted by Sarah Chen entering the room. She had visited him every day since his rescue, always bringing small gifts or simply talking to him about various topics. Today she carried what appeared to be a portable entertainment device. "Hope I'm not interrupting," Sarah said cheerfully. "I brought something I thought Crix might enjoy." She set up the device to project a three-dimensional image above his bed. The image showed a vast landscape filled with green plants and blue water under a bright yellow sun. Strange creatures moved through this world, some with 4 legs like himself, others with wings, all of them apparently free to go wherever they chose. "This is Earth," Sarah explained, "my home planet. Those 4-legged creatures are called dogs, and they're actually quite similar to you in many ways. But on Earth, dogs are our companions, not our weapons." Crix watched in fascination as the images showed humans and dogs playing together, running through open spaces and even sleeping side by side. The dogs appeared happy, an emotion he was still learning to identify. More importantly, the humans clearly cared for these creatures not for what they could do, but simply for what they were. "You treat them as family?" he asked, struggling to understand the concept. "Exactly. Dogs have been humanity's companions for thousands of years. They're loyal, intelligent, and loving. We consider them our best friends." Sarah looked at him meaningfully. "When I first saw you on that battlefield, that's what I thought of, a wounded dog who needed help." Dr. Hayes stood up to leave them alone. "I'll check on you later, Crix. Think about what we discussed, okay?" After the doctor left, Sarah settled into the chair and continued showing him images of Earth. She explained how dogs lived with human families, how they played and learned and formed emotional bonds with their human companions. The idea that beings could exist purely for companionship and mutual affection seemed like fantasy to him. "Why are you showing me this?" Crix asked finally. Sarah was quiet for a moment, seeming to choose her words carefully. "Because I want you to know that there are alternatives to the life you've known. When you're fully healed, you'll have choices to make. You don't have to go back to being a weapon." "I do not understand. Where else would I go? What else could I do?" "You could stay with us if you wanted. The Colonial Defense Force has been looking into establishing a program for refugees from various conflicts. You could be one of the first participants. Sarah's voice grew more enthusiastic as she spoke. You could learn new skills, maybe even help other warhounds who find themselves in similar situations. The possibility seemed too incredible to believe. Your military would allow a former enemy to remain among them? You were never really our enemy, Crix. You were a prisoner of your circumstances, forced to fight in a war that wasn't your choice. The humans who make our policies understand the difference between soldiers who choose to fight and those who have no other options. Over the following days, Crix found himself visited by a parade of humans, each offering him something different. A linguist came to help him learn more nuanced human languages beyond the basic translator functions. A therapist arrived to help him process what she called trauma from his military conditioning. Even the base commander, Colonel Williams, stopped by to personally assure him that he would be protected from any Valkyrian attempts to reclaim him. The most surprising visitor was a young human soldier named Tommy Rodriguez, who had lost his legs in a previous battle against Valkyrian forces. Instead of showing hatred or resentment, Tommy wanted to share his own experience of adapting to a new life after military service. The hardest part isn't the physical recovery, Tommy explained as he demonstrated his advanced prosthetic legs. It's learning to think of yourself as more than just a soldier. You've been conditioned to see yourself as a weapon, but weapons don't have dreams or preferences or relationships. People do. How does one learn to be a person instead of a weapon? Crix asked. Tommy grinned. One day at a time, my friend. One day at a time. As his physical healing progressed, Crix began to experience things he had never imagined possible. A chef brought him specially prepared meals designed to appeal to his enhanced senses, not just provide basic nutrition. An engineer showed him how human technology worked, not as weapons training, but simply because she thought he might find it interesting. A group of off-duty soldiers invited him to watch their recreational activities, where competition existed purely for enjoyment rather than to determine fitness for survival. Most importantly, Sarah continued to visit him regularly, and their conversations grew deeper and more personal. She told him about her own life, her family back on Earth, her dreams of becoming a doctor after her military service ended. In return, Crix found himself sharing thoughts and feelings he had never expressed before. His fear during battles, his loneliness during the long deployments, his confusion about his own identity. Do you think I could really learn to be more than what I was created to be? He asked her one evening as they watched the alien sunset through his room's window. Sarah looked at him with those strange blue eyes that had first shown him kindness on the battlefield. Crix, you already are more than what you were created to be. You chose your own name. You've learned to express your feelings. You've formed friendships. You've started to hope for a better future. Those aren't things a weapon can do. They're things a person does. Her words filled him with a warm sensation he was beginning to recognize as happiness. For the first time in his life, Crix began to believe that perhaps there really could be more to existence than warfare and death. Perhaps these remarkable humans could teach him what it meant to truly live. 6 months had passed since Sarah Chen first found Crix bleeding on the battlefield, and the transformation was remarkable. The once-broken warhound now served as the first official liaison between rescued Valkyrian military creatures and the human Colonial Defense Force. His office, located in a new wing of the medical facility, had become a symbol of hope for beings who had never imagined life beyond warfare. Crix barely recognized himself when he looked in the mirror. His dark fur had regained its natural luster, no longer dulled by constant stress and poor nutrition. His posture had changed from the rigid stance of a perpetually alert weapon to the more relaxed bearing of someone who felt truly safe. Most importantly, His eyes now held something they had never possessed before: genuine contentment. The work gave him purpose in a way that military service never had. Each week brought new rescues, other warhounds certainly, but also Valkyrian combat engineers, pilot slaves from various species, and even a few enemy soldiers who had defected rather than continue fighting. Crix had discovered he possessed a natural talent for helping traumatized beings adjust to the radical concept of freedom. "Good morning, Crix," called Dr. Martinez, the head of the Refugee Integration Program, as she passed his office. "Ready for today's new arrival?" Crix looked up from the reports he had been reviewing, accounts of successful rehabilitation cases that filled him with pride. "Always ready? What can you tell me about them?" 3 warhounds from the Proxima campaign, 2 males and 1 female, all showing severe conditioning trauma. The female, designation Nix 55 Beta 2, has been particularly resistant to interaction. She bit 2 of our medical staff yesterday. Crix nodded, understanding. He remembered his own suspicion and fear when the humans first tried to help him. "I will speak with her first. Sometimes it helps to hear from someone who has walked the same path." The transport had arrived an hour earlier, and the 3 new rescues were being held in the secure medical wing until they could be properly evaluated. As Crix made his way there, he passed through the communal areas where previous rescues were learning to live as individuals rather than weapons. In the recreation room, a former Valkyrian combat engineer named Vex was teaching human children how to build complex structures with building blocks. The children's laughter mixed with Vex's deep chuckles as their creations repeatedly collapsed in amusing ways. It had taken Vex months to understand that failure could be fun when there were no life or death consequences. The library had become a favorite gathering place for many refugees. Zara, a former pilot slave from the Centauri system, sat reading stories aloud to a group of young humans and rescued beings. Her voice, once used only for tactical communications, now brought fictional worlds to life with dramatic inflections and character voices. The children hung on every word, completely captivated. Most remarkably, the facility's therapy gardens had become a place where former enemies worked together to nurture new life. Valkyrian warhounds tended flower beds alongside human veterans, their enhanced senses helping them detect subtle changes in plant health that human eyes might miss. The symbolism was not lost on anyone. Beings bred for destruction, learning to create and preserve life instead. Crix arrived at the medical wing to find Sarah Chen waiting for him. She had been promoted to head of xenopsychology 6 months ago, specializing in helping non-human beings adapt to peaceful civilian life. Her work had become legendary throughout the Colonial Defense Force, and requests for her consultation came from bases across human space. "She's in room 7, Sarah reported. "Physically healthy but showing classic signs of deep conditioning trauma. She refuses to give herself a name and insists on using her military designation. Won't accept food unless it's presented as standard rations. Most concerning, she keeps asking when her next mission assignment will be announced." Crix felt a pang of recognition. He had exhibited many of the same behaviors during his early days of recovery. Has she shown any curiosity about anything? Any behavior that suggests individual preference rather than programmed response? Actually, yes. She was caught several times trying to look out the window at the gardens. When staff approached, she immediately snapped back to attention and claimed she was scanning for security threats. That was encouraging. Interest in natural beauty, even if disguised as tactical awareness, suggested that the individual personality beneath the military conditioning was still intact. Crix made his way to room 7, taking a moment to center himself before entering. The female warhound was exactly as he had expected to find her, standing at rigid attention in the center of the room, facing the door. Her posture was perfect military bearing, but Crix's enhanced senses detected the slight tremor in her muscles that indicated prolonged stress. She had probably been standing like that since she arrived, afraid to show any sign of relaxation that might be interpreted as weakness. "Combat Unit 77 Alpha 9 reporting as ordered," she said immediately upon seeing him. The words were delivered with mechanical precision, but Crix caught the slight uncertainty in her voice. His appearance confused her. He looked like a war hound, but his bearing was all wrong by military standards. "You may stand at ease," Crix said gently. "I am not here in any official capacity. My name is Crix, and I wanted to welcome you to the facility." Her ears twitched slightly at the word name, but her posture remained rigid. "This unit requires clarification. You appear to be a warhound, but you wear no rank insignia and display non-regulation behavior patterns." Crix sat down on the floor, deliberately making himself appear less threatening. "That is because I am no longer a warhound in the military sense. I am simply Crix now, an individual who happens to have been born with warhound genetics." "Impossible. Warhounds cannot exist outside military structure. We are purpose-built for combat operations." "I thought the same thing 6 months ago," Crix admitted. "I was wrong. We are capable of much more than we were taught to believe." For the first time, the female showed a crack in her conditioning. Her eyes widened slightly, and she took a half-step backward before catching herself. "You are speaking of desertion, of abandonment of duty." "I am speaking of freedom," Crix corrected. "The freedom to choose who you want to be instead of accepting what others decided you should be." Over the next hour, Crix shared his own story, his abandonment on the battlefield, his rescue by human medics, his gradual discovery that life could involve more than warfare and death. He spoke of friendship, of purpose chosen rather than assigned, of the strange human concept of happiness pursued for its own sake. The female listened with growing fascination, her military posture slowly relaxing despite her obvious efforts to maintain it. When he mentioned the gardens she had been caught observing, she flinched, as if he had discovered a shameful secret. "You like growing things?" Crix observed gently. "There is nothing wrong with that." "Warhounds are not programmed for agricultural interests," she said defensively. "Warhounds are not programmed for many things that we are nevertheless capable of enjoying. Tell me, when you looked at the gardens, what did you see?" She was quiet for a long moment, clearly struggling with some internal conflict. Finally, she spoke in a voice barely above a whisper. "Colors, so many colors that serve no tactical purpose, and the smell. It was pleasant in a way I could not categorize." "Beauty," Crix said simply. "You were experiencing beauty. It is one of the most fundamentally sentient responses there is. Beauty is irrelevant to mission parameters. There are no mission parameters here. There are only choices about how you want to spend your time and what kinds of experiences you want to have." The conversation continued for several more hours, with Crix patiently answering her questions and sharing examples of how other rescues had adapted to their new lives. Gradually, her curiosity began to overcome her conditioning. She asked about the children she had heard laughing in the corridors, about the strange concept of recreational reading, about whether it was really possible to engage in activities purely for enjoyment. By the end of their session, she had agreed to accept a tour of the facility the next day. More importantly, she had admitted to wondering what it might be like to have a name of her own choosing. "What should I call myself?" she asked as Crix prepared to leave. "Whatever feels right to you. Take your time. Try different possibilities until you find one that suits who you want to be." Over the following weeks, Crix worked with all 3 new rescues, but his connection with the female was special. She had chosen the name Luna after learning about Earth's moon from one of Sarah's educational videos. The concept of a celestial body that influenced tides and inspired poetry appealed to something deep in her nature that military conditioning had never quite suppressed. Luna threw herself into learning about civilian life with the same intensity she had once applied to combat training. She volunteered in the therapy gardens, discovering an intuitive understanding of plant care that amazed the human botanists. She learned to read, devouring books about everything from engineering to philosophy to cooking. Most remarkably, she began to laugh, tentatively at first, then with growing confidence as she realized that expressing joy was not a punishable offense. The day came when Luna felt ready to make her formal decision about her future. Like all rescues, she was given the choice to relocate to civilian colonies, remain at the facility as staff, or even return to her former life if she truly wished. The ceremony took place in the main conference room, with representatives from both human and various refugee communities in attendance. "I choose to stay," Luna announced when Colonel Williams asked for her decision. "But not as a refugee. I want to join the program staff. I want to help others find their way to freedom the same way Crix helped me find mine." The applause that followed was thunderous. Crix felt his throat tighten with emotion as he watched Luna formally accept her new role as a counselor in the refugee integration program. She would be the first female warhound to serve in such a capacity, and her success would open doors for countless others. Later that evening, as the celebration wound down, Crix found himself in the gardens with Sarah Chen. They often spent time there together, talking about the day's successes and challenges, while enjoying the peaceful beauty of the growing plants. "You've come so far," Sarah observed as they watched Luna carefully tending a bed of flowering vines. "When I first found you, I never imagined you would become such an important leader. I never imagined I could become anything other than what I was created to be," Crix replied. "Your species taught me that creation is not destiny. We all have the power to remake ourselves into something better." Sarah smiled, that same warm expression that had first shown him kindness on a battlefield that now seemed like a lifetime ago. "That's very human of you to say." "Perhaps it is. I have learned much from humans about what it means to truly live rather than merely exist." Above them, the alien stars shone down on a facility where former enemies worked together to heal wounds that went far deeper than physical injuries. In the gardens, beings who had known only warfare were learning to nurture new life. In the workshops, creatures bred for destruction were discovering the joy of building useful things. In the common areas, individuals were forming friendships across species lines that their respective governments had declared impossible. It was, Crix reflected, exactly the kind of future that only humans could have envisioned. A future where hope triumphed over conditioning, where compassion proved stronger than programming, and where the simple act of treating every thinking being with dignity and respect could transform the galaxy itself. As Luna's laughter echoed across the gardens, mixing with the voices of dozens of other beings who had found new purpose in life, Crix knew that Sarah had been right from the very beginning. Sometimes the most powerful thing any species could do was simply refuse to abandon hope, even for a wounded enemy bleeding alone on a battlefield.